everyone, I hope you're all doing so well and having an amazing week, and welcome to this highly controversial topic, which is cadmiums. To my channel, I would love it so much if you were to subscribe and comment and like as always. Well, what are cadmiums? Cadmium was discovered in the 19th century by the German chemist Friedrich Stallmeyer, and they've been widely used since then because of their intense and strong pigmentation, their high light fastness, which of course is great for any artist because we want our paintings to last years and years without fading, and of course their brilliant capabilities for mixing and their incredible tinting strength. Some amazingly famous artists who are, very well associated with cadmiums, and so the main one would be Monet, who used them a lot in many of his paintings, including the water lily. Then we also have, of course, Van Gogh and the very famous sunflowers. And Munch's The Scream, one of my favourite paintings ever. Cadmiums come in three main colours. You'll have cadmium red, cadmium yellow, and cadmium orange. Now, why don't I have any cadmiums to show you here? I tell you honestly that I don't own any cadmiums, though I have used them before. And the reason I don't own them is coming up at the end. I'll explain at the end, but it's not actually to do with the toxicity, or rather it's not entirely to do with that. But I have used them before in art classes because they're kind of still a huge, big deal. Cadmium itself is expensive, and you will feel so fancy when you're using them. You will feel like you're part of the exclusive cadmium club, because any artist who uses cadmiums a lot, they really do talk about it. Like, yeah, I use cadmiums in my paintings because it is so expensive. It has that really great reputation of, this incredible light fastness and this incredible pigmentation. You are going to be spending some money when you're buying them, so why not? I mean, I can understand if I had bought a cadmium, I'd be telling people all the time, hey, I've got my cadmiums in my paintings. So you're looking at £30, at least £30 upwards for any cadmium colour. So if you think about, for example, a white or a black costs around, £7, £6 maybe, in oil paint I'm talking about. Because you can get cadmiums in acrylic and also watercolour as well. But in oil paint, yes, you're looking at a hefty price tag. Now, why are cadmiums so controversial, and why are they potentially going to be banned? Cadmiums in the future may be banned, and artists are up in arms because of this. From what I've read, it's actually not to do with what people think it's to do with, if that makes sense. I think a lot of artists think that the cadmiums are going to be banned because of artist safety, but actually it's more to do with environmental safety. Cadmium is toxic to the environment, so the argument is that artists who've been using cadmium in their jars with their medium and then have been throwing that down the sink, this has been going into the water and then polluting the environment. However, there is a counter argument, which is that the pollution that's been found of cadmium in the environment is actually coming from cadmium nickel batteries, which I personally think is more likely, because I don't think there are so many artists out there in an enormous volume throwing cadmium down the sink. Of course, if you are an artist using cadmium pigments, it is so important not to throw any cadmium down the sink. Artist safety, the toxicity comes from inhaling the dust of the cadmium pigment, which is very toxic. And also, I personally like to wear gloves when I paint anyway, even though I don't use cadmiums. But I think in very large amounts, if you have exposure of cadmium pigments to your skin, then there could be some toxicity there. So I would just say wear gloves anyway, just to ensure there's no risk of that. And if you eat your paints, if you eat cadmium in very large amounts, this could be toxic. I don't suggest eating any paint. I mean, the thing is, I don't think it's likely. I do know that there were artists back in the day, people like Van Gogh, for example, who used to, when he used to paint, sometimes he'd stick his paintbrush in his mouth. And I think that people think this is really, really weird. But actually, when you're painting, sometimes you get into such a flow and you're like in a dream, you're like, wow, this is going so well, and you don't actually sometimes realise what you're doing. So when I read that about Van Gogh, I remember thinking, oh, I totally get that. Like, you know, you're so busy doing something, you just are not even aware of what's going on. But I think he also used to, possibly on his brush would be turpentine as well. So again, even more hazardous. So yeah, so just don't eat it. Why don't I use cadmiums? Well, when I started painting a few years ago, firstly, I was broke, and I'm still broke, but I was even more broke then, and I didn't think I needed them because I thought, wow, they're so expensive. And when you're a beginner artist, you're like, why are they so expensive? No way. And you just bypass it. At least I did, because I'm completely self-taught. So I didn't have any, you know, art teacher telling me, oh, cadmiums are actually incredible. And so I didn't buy them because of the price. And I therefore looked for alternative reds. And there are tons of alternatives out there, some better than others, I'd like to add. And the reds that I would choose then were sort of the orangey reds, so very similar to cadmium reds. But I actually found that having sort of used similar reds to cadmiums, I didn't use those types of reds very much on my palette. I prefer a much deeper red, and I still use much deeper reds. So I've never really required the cadmium red. And in terms of cadmium yellow, I have used it many times. I say many times, a couple of times in art classes, and I have really enjoyed it. But because I don't paint a ton of still lifes, I found it to be extremely useful for still life painting, or painting, you know, flowers outside. Those are two things I don't actually paint a great deal of. So again, I have not purchased it because I know it's slightly more rare colour for me. I did get an alternative to cadmium yellow. It was by Michael Harding, and I can't remember the exact name of it. And I used that for a while, but again, it was a yellow that I didn't use that often. So for me, I've never really required using them. Maybe in the future, if my palette changes a bit, I might look into it. To confess that the chances of me using them in the future is very unlikely. I tend to avoid toxic pigments, and I have not a particularly big workspace when I'm painting, unfortunately, and I don't have amazing ventilation. Like, I have windows, I always keep them open when I'm painting, or always after painting as well. But I try to keep my paints non-toxic as much as possible, because my workspace isn't enormous. And also, like Van Gogh, although I cannot claim to ever be as, you know, as amazing as him, but like him, I do go off into my own little fantasy land when I'm painting, and I don't then pay much attention to what I'm doing. And if I'm using a lot of toxic substances, I would have to actually pay attention to what I was doing. So instead, I just stick to the basics. I kind of investigate the ingredients of what oil paints I'm buying, which I do highly recommend to everyone, and then I try not to buy the ones that are of a more toxic nature. It's about toxicity and cadmiums. If you've ever wondered why on earth some of these oil paints have such a reputation, why people rave about them, and also whether or not you want to use them. If you do, you will probably create some of the best paintings on earth, but just remember to take care when disposing of your cadmiums, and also to just keep some good health and safety. And remember in the back of your mind that as much as you may get attached to them now, they may be discontinued in the future. So if you love them, go out and buy a ton of them because you may not see them again. So I'd like to say thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Take care, guys.